The colony of Elysium Prime was a good place to live. It sat far out on the edge of human space, past the busy trade lanes and the big inner worlds, in a quiet corner of the Orion Arm. 4.2 million people called it home. They had farms that stretched for miles, clean rivers, schools full of children, and research stations where scientists worked on things that would one day help all of humanity. It was not a military world. It was not a fortress. It was just a place where people built lives. Governor Nathan Cole had been running the colony for 6 years. He was not a soldier or a politician by trade. He was a civil engineer who had come to Elysium Prime to help build its water systems and never left. The people liked him because he was honest and did not make big speeches. He fixed problems and kept the lights on. On the morning everything changed, he was sitting in his office reviewing a report about a damaged bridge on the colony's eastern road. The first alert came from the outer sensor grid at 0612 hours. One ping. Then another. Then the grid went dark. Cole called his communications officer immediately. The officer tried to reach the sensor stations. No answer. He tried to reach the patrol ships stationed at the colony's edge. Nothing. Within 8 minutes, every signal from the outer zone had gone silent. Cole stood up from his desk. He had a bad feeling in his chest, the kind that did not need explaining. He never got to sound the full alarm. The ships came out of the dark without any warning. They were not human ships. They were long and gray and shaped like something between a blade and a claw, and there were hundreds of them. They did not hail the colony. They did not ask for surrender. They did not transmit any message at all. They simply opened fire. The outer districts burned first. The farming settlements on the eastern plains were gone in minutes. The research station on the northern ridge sent a distress call that lasted 11 seconds before it cut off. The colony's small defense platforms fought back for a short while, but they were built for patrol work, not war. They were destroyed one by one. The ships belonged to a civilization called the Vreth Dominion. They were an old empire, proud and hard, and they believed that any species expanding into new space without their permission was a threat that needed to be removed. They had been watching human colonies push outward for years. Elysium Prime was the farthest one. They chose it to send a message. The attack lasted 4 hours. A cargo freighter pilot named Owen Garza was making a routine delivery run to the colony's main port when the sky started to burn. He had 30 seconds to make a decision. He turned his ship around and ran. He did not feel good about it. He wanted to go back. But he had 300 people on his ship, workers, families, a school group that had been on a field trip to the port. He ran. He pushed his freighter hard through the debris field, took 3 hits from something that grazed the hull, and came out the other side bleeding from a cut on his head where a loose panel had hit him. His ship was damaged. His hands were shaking. But his 300 passengers were alive. One of them was a young medic named Laura Simmons, who had been traveling back from a medical conference on the inner worlds. When the attack started, she had not panicked. Instead, she pulled out her personal datapad and started recording everything she could see through the porthole. The burning settlements. The wreckage floating past. The shapes of the Vreth ships moving through the smoke. She recorded for the entire escape. She did not say a word while she recorded. She just watched and kept the camera steady. Owen got his crippled ship back to the nearest human station 14 hours later. Before he even docked, the footage was already being broadcast. Every screen on every human world picked it up within 48 hours. The death toll came in slowly, as those things always do. Rescue ships went out. They found very few survivors. The final number was 4,200,000 dead. It was the largest single loss of human life in history. Then the Vreth Dominion sent their message. It came in on a standard diplomatic frequency, calm and flat, as if they were discussing a trade agreement. It said, "Your expansion ends here. Retreat behind your old borders. Or face continued correction." The word correction sat in the air like something poisonous. Owen Garza read the message sitting in a medical bay while a doctor cleaned his head wound. He did not say anything. He looked at the screen for a long time and then looked away. Somewhere down the corridor, he could hear a child crying. He thought about the 4 million people he had not been able to carry on his ship, and he stared at the wall, and he said nothing at all. 3 weeks after Elysium Prime burned, the Great Hall of the United Human Directorate in Geneva was so quiet that a person could hear the ventilation system humming in the walls. Every seat was filled. Every screen in every corner of every human world was tuned to the same feed. People sat in their kitchens and their living rooms and their workplaces, and they watched and they waited. The alien ambassadors were watching too. Representatives from the Keth Alliance, the Sorvani Collective, the Marin Trading States, and dozens of smaller governments had sent observers to see what humanity would do. Most of them expected the usual. A formal protest. A demand for reparations. Maybe a show of small warships at the border. That was how these things went. A mid-tier power like the Vreth Dominion attacked a colony, the victim complained loudly for a while, and then everyone negotiated and moved on. The Vreth Dominion seemed to think so too. Their formal terms arrived 2 days before the council session. They were written in a cold, businesslike tone, as if the Vreth were doing humanity a favor by offering terms at all. Humanity was to abandon all colonies beyond a boundary line that cut deep into already settled human space. A yearly resource tribute would be paid to the Dominion. Humanity would publish a formal statement acknowledging Vreth territorial rights over the disputed regions. And the whole matter would be closed. Laura Simmons sat in the gallery of the Directorate Hall that day. She had been called to testify before the full council 2 days earlier, and she had done so with her datapad in her hands and her voice very steady. She had not cried. She had shown them the footage, and she had told them what she saw, and she had answered every question they asked. When it was over, a council member told her she had shown great courage. She thanked him politely and went back to her seat in the gallery, where she had been sitting ever since, waiting. Director General Carol Maddox was a small woman with short gray hair and the kind of stillness that made people pay attention when she moved. She had been in office for 11 years. She had negotiated trade agreements, managed 3 border disputes, and guided humanity through a dozen smaller crises. She was not a person given to dramatic gestures. She let the Vreth terms be read aloud in full. She let the silence sit after they were finished. Then she stood up from her chair, and the room went even quieter than it already was, which did not seem possible but happened anyway. She said 7 words, "Bring me the Admiralty." All of it. There were people in that room who had spent years near the upper levels of the Directorate government and had never once heard those words spoken together in that order. The Admiralty session was not a public meeting. It was not even an official meeting in the normal sense. It was a closed session in a room 3 levels below the main hall, and almost no one outside of certain military circles knew what was discussed there. Fleet Admiral Leon Hurst arrived within the hour. He was a big, quiet man who had spent 40 years in the Directorate Navy and had the kind of face that did not show much. He sat down across from Carol Maddox and a small group of senior council members, and he opened a secured briefing file, and he began to talk. What he told them was not something that had ever been made public. It was not something that had ever been shared with alien governments or outside observers or even most of the Directorate's own civilian leadership. It was the actual count. The real number. The full size of what humanity had been quietly building in the deep dark of space for the past 60 years, in hidden foundries around brown dwarf stars and in cold storage facilities tucked inside asteroid belts far from any inhabited system. The people in that room sat very still while he talked. One council member asked him to repeat the number. He repeated it. Carol Maddox looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up at Leon Hurst and said, "How long to bring them all active?" He told her. She nodded once and said, "Do it." Laura Simmons was still sitting in the gallery upstairs when a staff member came and told her she had been requested to make one final submission to the council record. They gave her a form and asked her to write whatever she felt should be formally included. She took the form and sat with it for a while. Then she wrote one sentence. It said, "Do not just push them back. Make sure they never do this to anyone again." She signed her name and handed it back. Somewhere far out in the dark, past the trade lanes and the busy inner worlds, past the last human stations and the quiet edge of explored space, lights began to come on. In the cold silence around distant stars, machines that had been sleeping for years started to warm up. Engines that had never been fired in real combat began their ignition cycles. Crews received recall orders on their personal communicators, looked at the messages, and started packing. The fleet was waking up. And the galaxy had no idea. The Voss Nebula was not on most star charts. It sat in a part of space that was listed in public records as an uncharted debris zone, too dense and too unstable for safe travel. This was not entirely accurate. The debris was real. The instability readings were real. But they had been carefully managed for decades by people who understood exactly what they were hiding. Behind the outer shell of tumbling rock and ionized gas, there were shipyards. Not small ones. Not the kind that built freighters or patrol vessels. These were foundries the size of small moons, dry docks that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, fuel depots buried deep in the rock, crew barracks carved into hollow asteroids. There were dozens of facilities like this scattered across human space, all of them dark, all of them quiet, and all of them very, very full. Captain Derek Ewan received his activation orders on a Tuesday morning while he was eating breakfast in his apartment on a station in the inner colonies. The message was 6 words long. It contained a ship name, a docking code, and a departure time. He read it twice, put down his fork, and started getting dressed. His ship was called the Resolute Dawn. It was a Sovereign-class dreadnought, the largest class in the Directorate Navy, and it was the size of a small city. Derek had commanded it for 3 years but had never taken it into actual combat. He was a patient man, methodical and calm, the kind of officer who read every report twice and never raised his voice. His crew respected him for it. His tactical officer was a woman named Priya Novak. She was from Elysium Prime. Her parents had lived there, her 2 brothers, her childhood friends. All of them were among the 4 million. She had found out 3 weeks ago while watching the news on a screen in her bunk. She had not taken leave. She had not requested reassignment. She had come back to work the next morning and done her job as if nothing had changed, except that the look in her eyes was different now, and the people who worked near her knew not to talk to her about it. Owen Garza, the cargo pilot who had carried 300 survivors away from the burning colony, found himself in a very unexpected place. After his ship docked and his passengers were safe, the Directorate had debriefed him for several days. Someone in the Naval Command had noticed that he had successfully navigated a damaged ship through an active combat zone and had kept his head while doing it. They offered him a commission as a naval liaison officer. He accepted, mostly because he did not know what else to do with himself. The fleet assembled over the course of 10 days. 700,000 warships, pulled from cold storage and hidden yards across human space. Destroyers and frigates and cruisers and carriers and, at the center of each great formation, the massive Sovereign-class dreadnoughts, each one big enough to carry tens of thousands of crew and enough firepower to crack open a moon. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in recorded history. No human had ever seen all of it in one place. Most humans did not even know it existed. The alien governments found out gradually, and the way they found out was not through any official announcement. It was through their own sensor networks, their own intelligence ships, their own scouts that were quietly watching human space as a matter of routine. Those ships started picking up signals. 1, then 10, then 100, then thousands, then so many that the sensor readings looked like errors. The Keth Alliance ambassador sent an emergency transmission to Earth. His message said that their long-range sensors were detecting an extraordinary number of human vessels in motion and asked, in a carefully polite way, if there had been some kind of malfunction. Carol Maddox replied within the hour. Her reply said, "There is no malfunction. Please clear the transit lanes along the following coordinates." The Sorvani Collective recalled their ambassador from the Vreth homeworld the same afternoon. They did not explain why. They did not need to. At the Vreth Dominion's War Council, High Commander Sorath received the first intelligence report about the human fleet movements and read it standing up. Then he read it again. Then he asked his intelligence chief if the numbers were correct. The intelligence chief said they appeared to be. Sorath said that was not possible. He said it the way a person says something when they know they are probably wrong but cannot yet accept it. He had expected, at most, a few thousand human ships. Perhaps 10,000 if humanity was angrier than he had anticipated. He had 40,000 ships in his battle fleet, and he had considered that more than sufficient. The report in his hands described a number that made 40,000 sound like a small village guard. He decided the sensors were malfunctioning. The human fleet completed its assembly and moved. All 700,000 ships, in coordinated formations that covered so much space they could be seen as a pattern on long-range astronomical equipment. They moved toward Vreth territory at a steady speed, not fast and not slow, the way something moves when it is not worried about what it is going to find at the other end. Derek Ewan stood on the command deck of the Resolute Dawn and watched the formation on his display. He had been in the Navy for 22 years, and he had never seen anything like it. Nobody had. He opened a channel to Vreth space, identified himself by rank and name, and spoke in the same calm voice he used for every briefing. He told them, "You attacked our people. We are here to respond. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally." He closed the channel and waited. Soreth did not surrender. He had served the Vreth Dominion for 30 years and had fought in 7 campaigns and had never once retreated from an enemy. The intelligence numbers still looked wrong to him. His analysts kept insisting they were accurate, and he kept finding reasons to doubt them. It was not stupidity that made him refuse to believe. It was experience. In 30 years of war, he had learned that the side with more ships always won. The idea that he could be outmatched by a ratio that large was simply outside the shape of the world as he understood it. He committed his full battle fleet. 40,000 warships, everything the Dominion had, arranged in the deep space approaches near the fortress world of Kareth. It was the biggest military force the Vreth had ever put together in one place. He looked at it on his command display and felt, for just a moment, confident. The human fleet arrived at the edge of Vreth space 1 hour and 3 minutes after Derek Ewan's transmission. It did not announce itself. It did not make noise. 700,000 ships simply came out of faster-than-light travel in coordinated waves, one formation after another, spreading across the space around Kareth like a slow tide covering a beach. The process took 40 minutes. By the time the last formation dropped into normal space, the Vreth ships were surrounded on every axis. Soreth stood on his command bridge and looked at the sensor display and said nothing for a very long time. His fleet was outnumbered 17-1. The battle opened with an electronic warfare strike that the Vreth did not even know had happened. 3 days earlier, human specialist ships had quietly moved into position near the edge of Vreth space, not visible on standard sensors, and had delivered a series of signal pulses into the Kareth planetary defense grid. The pulses looked like background radiation. They were not. By the time the main fleet arrived, the defense grid around Kareth was already disabled, though nobody on the planet knew it yet. Then the human fleet simply began to work. There was no great charge. There were no speeches, no battle cries, no dramatic opening moves. The formations advanced in coordinated patterns that had been planned and drilled and revised for years, and they executed those patterns with the kind of precision that only comes from long preparation. The Vreth ships found themselves engaged on multiple fronts simultaneously, their communication channels jammed, their escape routes blocked, their command signals disrupted. Priya Novak ran the tactical operation from her station on the Resolute Dawn. She did not celebrate when ships went down. She did not react when her screen lit up with confirmed kills. She moved through the battle the same way she had moved through her work for the past 3 weeks, which was carefully and completely, with no room left over for anything else. When a junior officer near her made an excited noise after a particularly good strike, she looked at him once and he went quiet. She said to him, "Log every engagement. Every one of them needs to be on record." He nodded and turned back to his screen. The Vreth fought hard. That was something Derek Ewan noted in his log afterward, and he was not the kind of man to write things he did not mean. They were brave and they were well trained and they did not break easily. But bravery could not change the numbers, and training could not change the numbers, and after 4 hours of sustained combat the Vreth battle fleet had lost 80% of its ships. The remaining vessels were pulling back, some fleeing in disorder, some transmitting surrender codes. Soreth tried to activate the Kareth planetary defense grid. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. He stood at his command console and pushed the activation sequence 4 times and received the same empty silence each time, and that was the moment he finally understood the full shape of what had been done to him. The defense grid had been dead for 3 days. The humans had not simply brought more ships. They had planned this engagement down to its smallest details, long before the first shot was fired. Every civilization in the galaxy with a sensor array had been watching. The Keth Alliance Council chamber had fallen completely silent 2 hours into the battle and had not recovered. A senior Sorvani diplomat, watching the feed from his office, quietly cancelled a scheduled meeting with the Vreth trade minister and did not reschedule it. 3 smaller governments that had been quietly watching humanity expand and wondering if they should apply some pressure of their own were now having very different internal conversations. Sorath opened a channel to Derek Ewan. His voice was flat. He said that he wished to discuss terms. Derek Ewan looked at his display for a moment. He looked at the numbers on his screen, the engagement logs, the names of the places that had been hit. He looked at the back of Priya Novak's head as she worked at her station. He said, "Surrender is still on the table. Everything else is not." Sorath closed the channel. He sat in his command chair for a long time. Then he reached forward and sent the unconditional surrender code. The signing took place on a neutral station in open space, chosen because it belonged to no government and flew no flag. The Vreth civilian leadership came without Sorath, who had been removed from his position within 6 hours of sending the surrender code. They were quiet men and women who had watched their military confidence turn to dust in less than a day, and they sat across the table from Carol Maddox with the look of people who had not slept well. Carol did not rush. She did not make speeches. She read the terms clearly, one by one, in a voice that was neither warm nor cold, just steady. The Vreth were to pay full reparations for Elysium Prime over 30 years. Their military forces were to be capped at a number that would be verified regularly by a joint oversight body that included human officers. All Vreth territorial expansion was frozen for 50 years. A permanent human diplomatic and military presence would be established on the Vreth homeworld, with full access and no restrictions. Any future unprovoked attack on any human installation or colony by any party would trigger an automatic full response from the Directorate Navy. The Vreth lead negotiator asked, carefully, if there was room to discuss the military cap. Carol said no. He asked about the presence on the homeworld. She said no. He asked if there was any part of the terms that was open to negotiation. She looked at him for a moment and said, "The reparations payment schedule has some flexibility. Everything else is fixed." He signed. Laura Simmons was in the room for the signing. She had been asked to attend as a formal witness on behalf of the colony survivors. She sat near the back with her hands folded in her lap and watched the proceedings with the same calm, steady attention she had given everything since the day of the attack. When it was done and the documents were signed, she was asked if she had any statement for the record. She had submitted one additional term before the session. It was not a military term or a resource term or a political one. It was something else entirely. Every victim of Elysium Prime was to be named individually in the treaty documentation. All 4,200,000 names. The Vreth government was required to maintain a permanent public memorial on their homeworld acknowledging what had been done, and that memorial was never to be taken down or altered. The Vreth negotiators had hesitated over this one. Not because of the cost or the logistics, but because of what it meant. A memorial meant acknowledgement. Acknowledgement meant the thing could never be rewritten or softened later. It would sit there on their homeworld for as long as their civilization existed, in the middle of their capital district, with 4 million names on it. The lead negotiator had asked if this was truly necessary. Carol had not answered. She had looked at Laura, who was sitting quietly against the wall. Laura had not spoken. She had just looked back at the negotiator with the same calm expression she always wore now, and he had looked away first and signed the line. In the weeks that followed, 17 alien governments made contact with the Directorate to open or reopen formal diplomatic relations. 3 that had previously refused to recognize human sovereignty beyond the original borderlines suddenly requested embassies on Earth. Several that had been quietly watching human expansion with territorial interest revised their long-range strategies in ways that were never made public but were noticed. The Keth Alliance ambassador sent a private message to Carol Maddox. It was short. It said that they wished to admit, honestly, that they had not understood what humanity was when they advised negotiation. They said they understood now. Carol read it, wrote a brief note in the margin that said, "Good," and filed it. Owen Garza stood on the observation deck of the Resolute Dawn as the fleet began its return journey. 700,000 ships, pulling away from Vreth space in the same steady, unhurried way they had arrived. He watched them go on the viewport and thought about a lot of things. He thought about the morning of the attack and the 30 seconds he had been given to make a decision. He thought about the 300 people on his ship. He thought about the 4 million who were not. He did not try to balance those two numbers because he had learned in the past weeks that they did not balance, that trying to make them balance was a way of avoiding what they actually were, which was simply a number that was too big and a number that was too small, and neither one excused the other. He was not a hero. He knew that. He was a cargo pilot who had made one good choice in a terrible moment and had then been carried along by everything that came after. He had not planned any of this. He had not built the fleet or signed the treaty or named the 4 million. He had just driven his ship away from the fire and somehow ended up watching the end of the thing from a window on the biggest warship in human history. Down the corridor, in a small briefing room that nobody else was using, Priya Novak sat alone for the first time in weeks. The battle logs were filed. The engagement records she had insisted on keeping were complete. Her work was done, at least for now. She sat in the chair and did not look at anything in particular, and after a while the thing she had been holding back for 3 weeks finally came, and she let it. She cried quietly for a long time in the empty room. Nobody bothered her. Humanity did not go to war out of anger. It went to war out of memory. And the galaxy had learned, in the space of a few weeks, that those two things were not the same, and that the second one was far harder to satisfy, and far more dangerous to provoke.